My name's Wolf, and through this series of videos I'm going to introduce you to the crazy over-the-top world that nerds like me love so much, that is Warhammer 40,000. So get comfy, buckle in, and prepare for a Noob-Splaining session. So, one of the most famous but probably most misunderstood chapters of Space Marines is the Space Wolves, one of my two favourite chapters, the other being the Dark Angels, and also one of the original founding legions. So they're just ordinary Space Marines with their own unique culture, right? But before we get into that, first of all, if you're not yet subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. I'm so very close to my first personal milestone of 100 subs that I really want to tick that off and start the march towards 250 subs. So get everyone in your family, if they are not yet subscribed, to subscribe. Yes, I know that means you will have to talk to your family, but you never know, they might be nice people, so go ask them to subscribe. And while you're at it, get them to buy you some minis from Element Games. Now if you're UK or EU based, you can use my link below. And if you're in the US or anywhere else in the world, get them to buy you some custom dice, like these Space Wolf themed ones from Baron of Dice. Now if you've been keeping up with my previous videos, you will know that the God Emperor of Mankind, who from now on I shall be referring to as Emperor Chris, in honour of Mega Doom 101's epic comment from when I asked you all what the Emperor's real name was. Anyway, Emperor Chris originally created 21 Primarchs, who are demigods of varying levels of power, to lead the 20 legions of superhuman genetically enhanced Space Marines. In theory, all the Space Marines are pretty much identical in stats for strength, speed and size, but occasionally you get one that breaks the mould, but this is the exception, not the rule. All the gene seed used for Space Marines is technically the same, but each legion's gene seed has a small amount of their Primarch's DNA in it, giving the Space Marines characteristics of their Primarch. When Emperor Chris created the legions, 3 of them were supposed to be part of a trifecta that the Emperor had a plan for, those 3 legions being the Alpha Legion, who we assume were meant to be the spies and did a very good job of it, the Salamanders, whose true purpose was never revealed thanks to the Horus Heresy fucking up the whole chapter early on, and finally rounding it off with the Space Wolves. The Space Wolves were the Emperor's executioners, his own personal attack dogs. They were given the dirtiest of jobs, not necessarily the toughest, but definitely the dirtiest, because they would get the job done without hesitation. If a compliant world went rogue, 99% of the time it was the wolves who were let off the leash. This would mainly have 2 effects. First, any other systems nearby would see the result and be like, nope, praise the Emperor, we're all loyal here, nothing to see. Secondly, the shame another legion would feel knowing that the brutal, barbaric, savage Space Wolves had to finish the job properly made sure they did not leave a world until it was truly compliant. Now if all you know about Space Wolves is from memes, then you probably think either they're all furries or space Vikings, or a bit of both. If you have read just a small amount about them, then you probably get the impression they are hyper-violent, animalistic in nature, and enjoy nothing more than getting drunk and having a good old-fashioned punch-up, like any stereotypical Viking-themed faction, or any current-day military unit. Well, if that's your view of the Space Wolves, you are very wrong. But as I have said in a previous video, Space Wolves don't give a shit what you think about them. So let's get the basics down. The Space Wolves are a Space Marine chapter whose primary colours are grey with yellow shoulder pads. They are led by their Primarch, Layman Russ, who is such a badass the Imperial Guard named a tank after him. Their home world of Fenris is classed as a death world, and is pretty much frozen most of the year, with a little bit thawing out for a few months during what they call summer. But overall, the average temperatures on the planet are that low, it makes Antarctica feel like Jamaica. Fenris is located really close to the Eye of Terror, which at this stage in the timeline is the only natural passageway into the warp, and the Eye of Terror was created when the pointy-eared bastards called the Eldari caused the birth of Slaanesh. See my previous vid. Anyway, when the baby Primarchs got drop-kicked across the galaxy, this is where Layman ended up, and when life gives you lemons, you grab it by the balls and squeeze it until it gives you what you really wanted, which is exactly what Layman did. After being raised by wolves a la Mowgli style from Jungle Book, he did then what most of the best Primarchs do, and became king of the planet, instead of being a whiny little bitch about how hard his life is. When Emperor Chris turned up, Layman challenged him to 3 contests to prove he is the actual Emperor. The first was an eating contest, which Layman won. The second was a drinking contest, which Layman also won. So when it came to the third, which was a good old-fashioned punch-up, the Emperor was pretty bored at this point, so bitch slapped Layman so hard it knocked him into the next hour. That was all Layman needed and bent the knee to the Emperor. In my head though, all I can imagine is Emperor Chris using his psychic powers to charge up a rolled up newspaper before he whacked Layman on the nose with it whilst yelling, "Bad Primarch!" So Layman took control of his legion that Emperor Chris had fortunately brought with him, and his warriors on Fenris were like, they look big and tough, make us into them. And the Emperor was like, now sorry, look, you're all too old, most of you will die. And Layman's warriors just looked at him as they put their beers down and rolled up their sleeves ready for the first round of injections. Out of either sheer stubbornness or the fact they were all harder than coffin nails, most survived the transformation into Space Marines. So then Emperor Chris said something on the lines of, let's get you a better homeworld. And Layman was like, nah, this one's fine. So then one of Emperor Chris's custodies said, but it's bloody freezing here. And Layman was like, well, put a cardigan on then, you fucking nesh tube of custard. Now I might be paraphrasing a little bit, but I can imagine that's pretty much how it went. So Emperor Chris shrugged his shoulders and ordered the Mechanicum to build the Space Wolves of Fortress Monastery, which is a super Space Marine home base. Basically they took the tallest mountain, turned some of it into a castle, hollowed out most of it into multiple levels including hangar bays, barracks and all the other things a Space Marine Legion needs, and they covered the whole fucking thing with really big guns. The Space Wolves then joined in the Great Crusade, and soon gained a reputation as brutal, hyper-violent, savage killers that made some of the other Primarchs raise concerns. I can imagine how that went too. Layman, come here. Now you need to calm your lads down a bit or we're going to have to get Daddy to hit you on the nose again with the newspaper. To which Layman eloquently and intelligently argued the merits of his shock tactics by simply telling them to get fucked in the neck, because Space Wolves don't give a shit what you think. Most of the other loyalist Primarchs were, I don't think scared is the right word, but were definitely intimidated to some extent by Layman, and the traitors would outright shit their pants if they were told Layman is on his way over. To the untrained outsider watching them fight, Space Wolves appear to be nothing more than hyper-violent savages, and that's because that's what they want you to think. Actually, that's not quite true. They don't actually give a shit what anyone else thinks about them, they've got a job to do. In reality, they are very intelligent, cunning warriors who can actually stalk their prey silently wearing full plate armour, and they also specialise in the use of shock tactics, of fast precision strikes causing as much damage as possible in the shortest amount of time, forcing the enemy to either surrender or collapse out of fear that they are next. Whereas the World Eaters would kill everyone on a planet, the Space Wolves will decimate a city, then turn and look at the next while raising an eyebrow and pointing back at the other city as if to say, give up or you're next. Layman knew he was never going to be named War Master, because that was not his role. A lot of Space Marines felt a pang of jealousy when Horus was named War Master over their Primarch, but not the Wolves, as again, they understood their role. During the Great Victory and the ensuing celebration at Ullanor, where Horus was named War Master, there were very few Space Wolves present. Frankly, they've got better things to do than metaphorically pat a Primarch on the back for getting a promotion, like fuck shit up. So the Space Wolves are the Emperor's executioners. They know their role, and they don't give a shit if you know it as well. At this point, the history of the Space Wolves goes a bit blank. That's because it was redacted. But it is pretty much established that they take orders only from the Emperor Chris himself, and any other order they receive from anyone they consider to be just a mere suggestion. Now before we get to the next major point that we have actual clarification of, we need to delve into a little bit of speculation. As I mentioned earlier, Emperor Chris created 21 Primarchs, of which only 19 are known. If the rumours are true, especially with the redacted bit of history, then the two other Primarchs were dealt with by Layman, inferring he killed one and captured the other, and the legions they were meant to lead were then folded into the the Ultra-Ring, and everyone then made a pinky promise not to talk about it ever again. If this is true, that makes Layman the first Primarch to kill another Primarch. It also raises the possibility the Space Wolves were the first legion to fight other Space Marines, depending on whether the unknown two were dealt with before or after they took command of their legions. Layman is arguably the best fighter amongst all the Primarchs, and if he already has the one kill under his belt, this would have affected him massively, because not only is Layman and his Space Wolves super loyal, he does love his brothers. Being ordered to kill one would have messed him up a little, which is probably why the other is in jail under the Emperor's palace and not in a coffin. This would also explain the reason why the fight between him and the Lion went on for so long. After already killing one brother and successfully fucking up another to the point it was captured, when him and the Lion were fighting, I imagine the Lion was doing everything he could to beat the shit out of Layman, but Layman was just play fighting. And trust me, I prefer the Lion over Layman. When I say the Space Wolves and Layman are super loyal, I mean it. To the point hardly any Space Wolves have ever fallen to Chaos, to the point where Chaos doesn't even try to turn them anymore because it's just a wasted effort. But the Space Wolves don't give a shit if Chaos wants to waste efforts or not. Before the Horus Heresy drew to a conclusion, Magnus the Red, who is arguably the second strongest psyker in the setting after Emperor Chris himself, was encouraging his legion, the Thousand Sons, to dabble in warp magic. A few of his brother Primarchs got together and were basically saying warp magic bad. We need to stop using librarians, which are the technical name for Space Marine psykers, aka the Space Wizards. A few other Primarchs, including Magnus himself, put forward great arguments as to how effective the librarians are, and how much they have helped the legions in their reconquest of the galaxy. Then right at the end, when it was time for closing arguments, Magnus ruined it all by basically saying he and his legion are that powerful at controlling warp magic, nothing in the world can hurt them. Emperor Chris realised how arrogant and naive Magnus was, so he banned the use of librarians by all the legions, and they were then forced to return to the normal rank and file troops. That's akin to making a Jedi be a normal stormtrooper. This was known as the Edict of Nicaea, and that is the very TLDR version of it. So, all the librarians had to stop using warp-based psychic powers, except the Space Wolves, because they don't have librarians, they have rune priests, so the rules don't apply to them. So they carried on using psykers while everyone else had stopped, and they don't give a shit if you think that's fair or right. At one stage during the Horus Heresy, Layman could have killed Angron, but chose to let him live, as Layman believed he could be saved. I, however, have another theory on this. Layman actually manoeuvred Angron into a position where the Space Wolves could gun him down. Now, I don't care which Primarch you are, when you are surrounded by 50 angry Space Wolves in Terminator armour, you are going down. However, I think he backed out at the last minute because he didn't want to put his sons through the same trauma he's gone through already having killed one of his brothers, which is why he couldn't pull the final trigger on Angron. As the level of treachery became evident, Layman promised, however, that he would personally kill all of his traitor brothers. So then later on, when he was tricked into attacking Magnus, he broke Magnus's back, and just before he could deliver the killing blow, Magnus fell to Tzeentch and used the power to teleport the fuck out of there with what was left of his legion. As Horus was getting close to Terra, Layman managed to catch up with him and nearly killed him, even though Horus had all his Chaos power-ups. This was enough to scare Horus into getting a move on, before Layman healed up and came up for round 2. This caused the still injured Horus to attack Terra early, and it was not because the Ultramarines and Dark Angels were getting close, and the Space Marines don't give a shit if you believe this is true or not. After the Horus Heresy was over, the legions were broken down into chapters. As it was an order that came from Roboute Guilliman, again they considered it a suggestion more than a must-do. At the time, the Space Wolf Legion consisted of 13 great companies, all based in the Fang, but was each completely autonomous, having their own armories, own barracks, even their own hangars. So when Roboute said break up your legion, Layman basically said, okay, I'll break them up into 13 great companies, all of which will be autonomous. Roboute said, that's good enough for me, and so the Space Wolves are still technically a full legion. Due to the varying sizes of the companies and the fact that they won't let anyone do a full headcount, we're unsure on the actual numbers. But while it is believed to be nowhere near the 50,000 or so pre-heresy, it is believed to be around the region of 3,000 to 5,000 Marines, compared to the normal chapter size of just 1,000. When the traitor legions got their asses handed to them during the battle for Terra, any surviving traitors all bolted into the Eye of Terror. This gave Layman an idea that he wanted to encircle the entire Eye of Terror with Space Wolf successor chapters. So they organised a bunch of Marines, renamed them the Wolf Brothers, gave them a metric foot ton of gear, and told them to go build a fortress monastery on that planet over there. This is where the flaw in the Space Wolf gene seed became apparent. Although never fully explained, it is hinted that if Space Wolves spend too much time away from Fenris, they basically mutate into a frenzied Space Marine werewolf, which is a fucking frightening thought, and this resulted in the Wolf Brothers being put down by the Inquisition. So with this Wolf Brothers successor chapter failing, the Space Wolves shrugged their shoulders and thought, fuck it, we'll stay as a legion, which is obviously what the Emperor wants, besides he never told us to break down into chapters. With the addition of Primoris gene seed and the fact it has stabilised most mutations, there are now a handful of official Space Wolf successors, but for all intents and purposes, they are still a legion, and they don't give a shit what you think about that. Now you know how I said Fenris is close to the Eye of Terror? Well, basically, every time a Chaos Invasion fleet, known as a Black Crusade, invades real space, when they emerge from the Eye of Terror, they have two choices. Turn right and fight a few hundred, maybe 1,000 Space Wolves that are home right now, and not out murdering other dumb fucks in the galaxy because they were stupid enough to piss the wolves off, or turn left and run the gauntlet of Cadia, which is an entire planet of Imperial Guard, fortresses, titans, massive defence fleets in orbits, and huge numbers of orbital defence platforms. I'm not exaggerating when I say every granny on Cadia is packing a piece that would make Dirty Harry blush. The Black Crusade fleets turn left every time rather than face the Space Wolves. That's right, the traitor legions would rather face an entire planet that is just a military base, with millions upon millions of Imperial Guard, and the biggest Imperial Navy armada ever assembled, along with it being the winner for most orbital weapons platforms in orbit every year running without fail, than face a fraction of the Space Wolves. The Grey Knights might be specialised demon killers, but the Space Wolves are specialised everything killers, and just happen to be very fucking good at what they do, and they don't give a shit what you think about how they fight. Some point after the Horus Heresy was over, Layman took a few of his men and fucked off into the Eye of Terror, vowing to kill any surviving traitor Primarchs, and hasn't been seen since. Since time works differently in the warp, and Layman, having realised letting some of his brothers live was a mistake, it's fair to say he's still in the warp, fucking up traitors' days royally. The Space Wolves believe he will return when the Imperium is on the verge of destruction and will save the day. This also leads us into a slight problem. With Emperor Chris interred on the Golden Throne as basically a psychic corpse, and Layman gone, there is no one to give the Space Wolf any orders, only suggestions. So for the last 10,000 years they've been fighting the good fight against the enemies of the Imperium of Man, but generally doing what the fuck they want, which has led them to even come to blows with other members of the Imperium of Man, and they don't give a shit what the Inquisition thinks about this. At one point someone reported to the Church that the Space Wolves were worshipping idols and false gods in the Fang. So the Church sent out a bunch of officials to determine if this was true. However, the prick leading them though was an arrogant little fuck, and used to telling Space Marines what to do and then doing it. You can see how this is going to pan out, can't you? So he arrives at the gates of Fenris and immediately demands that they let him in so he can determine what punishment they get. Yep, that's right, not if it's true, but how much they were going to punish you for it just for someone making the claim. Then he accused them of committing heresy. Well, accusing a Space Wolf of heresy is like jumping out of a commercial aircraft without a parachute. Your remaining lifespan can generally be counted in seconds, which it was. At first they just ignored him, but were pretty pissed off, so when the arrogant little fuck tried to dock his ship at the Fang without permission, the Wolves just blew it the fuck up, and the rest of the officials legged it. A year later, the fools from the Church turned back up, this time with a load of Sisters of Battle for reinforcements. As soon as they arrived, the Sisters were like, "Wait, why are we at Fenris?" So the man from the Church told them, and I presume this is where their faces turned white. The Space Wolves hailed them and said, "First and only warning, fuck off right now or we're going to suit up." So naturally the Church didn't listen, and after 3 weeks of the Space Wolves explaining to them it's all fine, you can fuck off home now, in their native traditional Fenrisian cultural way, which basically means they spent the next 3 weeks beating the stupid out of them and some intelligence into them, when they finally got the message, they fucked off back home and vowed never to speak of this again. But the Space Wolves don't give a shit if they do or don't. Then there was the Months of Shame, but that's a video all on itself, and one I will cover another day, when I take us into more detail of how the Space Wolves operate, some of their name characters, and how badass they actually are. Until then, I hope you learned something about the Space Wolves. Mainly, they know that they are doing the right thing in the name of the Emperor, and don't give a shit what everyone else thinks or says about them. They are beyond being bestowed honours from others. They already have honour, and they don't give a shit about yours. And there we have it. Don't forget to like, subscribe and leave a comment. Better still, if you know somebody who could do with a bit of noob-splaining on Warhammer, then share this video with them. And at any point if you've learned something or laughed, then please hit that subscribe button. I won't ever be doing a Patreon or a merch store, so that subscribe button is the best way you can show your support and thanks from me.